I wanted to start my story on sort of genetically modified organisms and my interest in that and agricultural biology, biotechnology. Sort of started in I guess the late 70s, early 80s, when I was working in community development in rural Africa and saw what was happening to, through the Green Revolution, to agriculture in rural Africa, where it was the women that were doing most of the agriculture, most of the growing of food. It was the women that were gathering the water for the family homesteads during the day. It was the women that were planting the seeds. It was, but then as the Green Revolution took over and machinery came in, the men started taking over, maintaining the machines, and so on and so forth. But you saw some of the implications. There clearly are winners and losers out of the Green Revolution and in Africa. And that's sort of where my interest began, on where was agriculture going? Where was this industrialized system of agriculture from North America that was being exported abroad? What was it doing? Where was it going in the developing world? My interest further grew when I was working in the 80s as the executive director of what was called the Canadian Institute for Environmental Law and Policy, which was a non-profit, not a non-government organization in Canada doing policy research in these areas. And we were doing some studies on the need for public awareness and policy in the areas of agricultural biotechnology. There's no regulatory framework, there still is no regulatory framework, public consultations, labeling, public right to know, ways to address environmental, ethical, and social implications, the need to adopt the precautionary principle, and to develop a strong protocol on the movement of living organisms across borders. So that was some of the things that we were working on in the 80s. So what are some of the issues, and why are people so concerned about, but it seems to be abating. In Europe, there's a much stronger sense of concern of what we're doing in terms of genetically modifying the food that we're eating. There's clearly the concerns of food safety, there's concerns of health, there's concerns of environmental, but there's also the deeper, the effects on food, the effects on the agricultural systems of the world, the effects on biodiversity. But then there's also the cluster of concerns about power and the effects on decision making, on power and control. Who's making all these decisions on the patenting of seeds, on justice, on equity? Who has access to these seeds? We know the stories of Monsanto where, you know, once you've signed on and you've bought your genetically modified seeds, you have to, if you've signed a license, you have to buy them year after year. And we know the court cases when people either accidentally haven't done that, where there are Monsanto police that are going around the farms and saying, you didn't pay your license, or these are genetically modified seeds that you're not supposed to be growing. And it's just, I mean, that's happening in the United States as well as presumably overseas. There's GM seeds for soybeans, maize, canola, cotton. They were brought to market in 1996. They were marketed aggressively, particularly in the developing world, partly because the regulatory frameworks are even less stringent in the developing world than they might be in North America or in Europe. And I know for sure that, for example, South Africa is becoming the main central point for distributing genetically modified seeds and technology throughout Africa. And the whole next green revolution is going to be a revolution on genetically modified seeds. And that's being done on the backs of African farmers. The sales pitch is increased yields. This is the sales pitch that's coming from the corporations and the governments like yours and mine, Australia, Argentina. These are the main guys. But the sales pitch is that they're going to increase yields and it's going to address population. It's going to feed the growing population. The seeds are being commercialized before potential negative consequences could be assessed. The technology, the commercialization is moving at such a fast rate. The research is all mostly by the companies themselves. There's very little independent research on agricultural biotechnology. Farmers, citizens groups, and NGOs have been trying to draw the public's attention to some of these issues for decades now. And there's an increasing amount of literature. I mean, you know about the Monsanto movie, The World According to Monsanto. You know some of these learning things are trying to bring the public's attention to this issue. But now there is an increasing amount of literature which is published in peer-reviewed journals that is contradicting the claims of the corporations and of the industry. And that's what this little booklet tried to do. It certainly focused on two. One is a United States Department of Agricultural study that reviewed the usage of GM seeds after 10 years of availability. So this study was published it was done in 2005, where genetically modified herbicide-tolerant soybeans accounted for 87% of the soybeans planted in the United States, where genetically herbicide-tolerant cotton accounted for 60% of the total cotton acreage, where genetically modified insect-resistant corn was 35% of the total corn grown in the United States. Another study, which is done by the International Assessment of Agricultural Knowledge, Science, and Technology for Development, which was set up by the World Bank, of all people, in 2002. It was a multi-stakeholder group. Its latest report was published in 2009. There were 400 scientists from 60 countries involved. There were reservations to these findings were tabled by, guess which countries? The United States, Canada, and Australia. The conclusions of the report were that farmers are the principal generators and stewards of crop genetic resources. The social and economic impacts of genetically modified crops benefit large-scale owners. There's less evidence on the benefit for small producers in developing countries. The safety of genetically modified crops is controversial because there's limited data and long-term studies. The implications of genetically modified crops for biodiversity. There's limited number of independent peer-reviewed studies on human health. So what can we do? Obviously, we've heard before, support local organic agriculture, CSAs, farmers markets. Look at what we are doing as individuals, what we're eating, what we're consuming. Concentrate on public awareness. Talk about this when you can, and that's, again, is the purpose of this little booklet. We tried to make it cheap. We've talked about getting a cheaper newspaper fold or cheaper printed thing that could actually be distributed electronically and certainly to people in developing countries where there still might be a chance that they might save their agricultural systems. Seek ways to engage in public policy discussions and procedures. And in Canada, we've done some of these. We've brought this to the whole issue of patenting was brought by the Quakers in Canada to the Canadian Council of Churches in Canada, to seeking friend of the court status in Canada at the Supreme Court level, to being a friend of the court and appearing on it was actually not a patenting on food issue, it was a patenting on life forms, and it was the patenting of the Harvard Oncomouse. But in that particular case, the Supreme Court of Canada came down on the side of us, that in fact the life forms, higher life forms, could not be patented under the current Patent Act in Canada. We're the only G8 OECD country that's doing that. And there's an opportunity here. The BRCA, it's not food, but it's where all of this stuff is going, to patents on everything. There are something like 20% of the gene pool of your genes are patented now.